Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about, actually still thinking about, is United States President Joe Biden's trip to the Middle East. I really wanted US President Joe Biden's trip to the Middle East to be a success. Of course, what I consider to be a success and what the administration considers a success are nowhere near similar. We have two completely different sets of goals and two completely different assessments for success. Frankly, I wish they would listen to me because they would have been far more successful had they been paying attention to what I'm writing about and speaking about with regard to the notion of success in the Middle East. For my part, I was hoping two things would happen. If they did, the end result would be a less volatile Middle East, and the world would be taking a giant step back from the brink. A more normal, less intense, and fragile world would be in place. Call me a dreamer. It didn't happen yet, but maybe it still will. It would have been so easy. It was so obvious. Biden's two main objectives during his trip to the Middle East as president should have been, and this is important, number one, reestablishing the United States as the most dominant, significant player in the region. That was one. Number two, convincing regional players that U.S. involvement would instill a sense of regional stability. That's it. Those things were important. Those objectives should have been his mantra, repeated over and over and over again throughout the trip. In every meeting, at every opportunity, behind closed doors and in front of cameras and microphones. Those two principles. All the rest would have been, as they say, or as Hillel said, commentary. All activity should have been directed at securing those two objectives. Israel understands. They know what Biden could have done and what the U.S. president and his team could have accomplished. The Israelis made their point simply and clearly and often. And it was very simple, very clear. And here's what they said time and time again to President Biden. Diplomacy is only effective when accompanied by the serious threat of a military strike. That's right, a serious threat, not hyperbole, not diplomatic doublespeak. The interest of the United States and Israel's safety and security will be greatly improved if only these two objectives are achieved. There's still time. It's not yet a lost or hopeless cause, but not too much time left, I'll tell you that. If the United States does not reestablish itself as the dominant force in the Middle East, then Iran and Russia will. They're already setting the stage and made inroads to do that. And none of that bodes well for the free world, especially Israel and the United States. Iran and Russia are actually and are very real threats to the region. We already see how their respective influences have contributed to a far less stable region. Russia, but especially Iran, poke and prod Israel in the hope of provoking Jerusalem to respond. And the only thing is, yes, the only thing a response will accomplish is a larger, more far-reaching regional crisis. That poking and prodding explain why Hezbollah and Iran recently sent 3 drones to surveil Israel's Mediterranean gas rig. The best way for the United States to achieve these goals, there are 2 goals that I'm setting down, is to be perceived by the regional leaders and by extension by the leaders throughout the world as the leader of the world, just as it once was. President Biden needs to unite the region against Iran's race towards nuclear technology and weapons. President Biden needs to utilize Israel as a bulwark to help the region technologically and defensively. It is no small task, but neither is it an impossible task. Joe Biden and the country he represents, the United States, the great United States, are perceived across the board as extremely weak right now. Israeli leadership and Arab leadership see Biden as big on talk and very skimpy on deeds and follow-through. Israeli leaders, from the prime minister to the defense minister to the president to the head of the opposition, all repeated the very same line. Diplomacy with Iran will not work without a credible military threat. You heard that from me earlier. In plain English, that means Iran must believe that the United States will honestly and truly and actually strike, not just intensify sanctions, especially when it comes to energy Everyone knows why Biden went to the Middle East. It was not to solve the Palestinian issue. It was about energy, 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 and energy. Domestically, Biden botched his opportunities there. Internationally, he still has a chance. For that, the region and the world need to perceive him as uniting a force against evil Iran and evil Russia. The Abraham Accords is the perfect vehicle for the United States to unite the region against Iran and Iranian proxies like Syria and Hezbollah. A significant step has already been taken. The United States helped secure an agreement that allows the Israeli airline El Al and all other airlines to fly over Saudi Arabia en route to Asia. And they are working on direct flights just like the flight President Biden took from Israel to Saudi Arabia, allowing Muslim pilgrims to travel from Israel to Mecca for the annual Hajj. These aren't small steps. They are first steps. There is still a chance to make the world safer, but Biden needs to step up and take the lead. Coming up next, Points of View. First up is a column from YNet. It's by Itamar Eichner. It was published on July 17th, 2022. The column is entitled, Lapid Describes Saudi Gestures as Normalization. Subtitled, Despite dismissive statements from Riyadh, PM voices optimism and says process progressing in baby steps, an important step toward Israel's integration into the region. Sounds similar to some of what I was just speaking about, correct? Correct. This is how Eichner begins. Prime Minister Yair Lapid said on Sunday that a series of gestures on Saudi Arabia's part toward the Jewish state constitutes a form of normalization between the countries. What's happening with Saudi Arabia is indeed normalization, Lapid said at the opening of the weekly cabinet meeting, but reserved that the process is progressing in baby steps. Riyadh announced over the weekend it would allow commercial flights from Israel to use its airspace en route to the Far East. Lapid called the decision an important step toward Israel's integration into the region and added that the move would, quote, save money and time for our citizens and increase competitiveness between airlines, unquote. But of course, the Saudis say something very different. Here's how Eichner describes the Saudi interpretation of the events. He writes, however, Saudi Arabia's foreign minister said on Saturday he was not aware of any discussions on a Gulf Israeli defense alliance and that the kingdom was not involved in such talks. Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud told reporters after a U.S. Arab summit that Riyadh's decision to open its airspace to all carriers had nothing to do with establishing diplomatic ties with Israel and was not a precursor to further steps. Eichner concludes by explaining that the Saudis' normalization with Israel will not happen until a two-state solution is in place. He continues, meanwhile, speaking to CNN in an interview, Saudi Minister of State for Foreign Affairs, Abdul al-Jubair, reiterated the Gulf Kingdom's long-held stance that it will not fully normalize relations with Israel until a two-state solution with the Palestinian population is reached. I've said it before and I'll say it again. If you're asking me, there is movement and even interaction, but there is not, at least not yet, official normalization. But that's very good news, certainly for the Middle East. Next up is a column by Yedidya Stern. This column, too, was published in YNet on July 16th, 2022. The piece is entitled, Israel Must Maintain, Preserve Future of Diaspora Jews, subtitled, Opinion, unless a strategic initiative is taken, the cohesiveness of the Jewish people as a whole could be at risk as ultra-Orthodox anti-liberal groups on one side and progressive who no longer have ties with Israel on the other grow in strength and number. Stern is the head of the JPPI, the Jewish People's Policy Institute. It's a think tank, a very well-funded think tank. Before this appointment, he was the head of the Israel Democracy Institute, another think tank, also very powerful. And he's the former dean of the Bar Ilan Law School. This is how Yedidya Stern begins. On the week that Doron Almog assumes his role as the head of the Jewish Agency, it is time to observe the trends that would affect the future of the Jewish people in the diaspora. On the one hand, this is one of the best times. Jews living in the diaspora enjoy social and economic security, and anti-Semitism, although on the rise, is far from what it was in the past. On the other hand, Jewish communities are impacted by polarization, with the centrist positions weakening and the ideological extremes gaining strength. This is a threat to the cohesiveness of the next generation of the Jewish people. Now Stern offers his perspective on what the Jewish world will look like in the future. This is critical because if you get a sense of what the future is, then maybe you can create a plan to address it. He continues, in 15 years' time, the ultra-Orthodox will account for a quarter of the world's Jewish population. Haredim double in number every 20 years, while the general Jewish population takes 300 years to multiply. Let me repeat that. It's worth hearing it again. Haredim will double in number in 20 years, and in 15 there will be 25% of the world Jewish population. Stern continues, this enormous growth poses a challenge, as a small group of Haredi communities needs to segregate themselves was not a problem, but as a quarter of the entire Jewish body, such a segregation could have strategic consequences. And that's not the only problem, writes Stern. He's also concerned that young Americans are moving away from their fidelity towards Israel and moving away from Judaism. He writes, on the other extreme are progressive Jews. Most Jewish Americans support the Democratic Party, and some 70% of them are supporters of Israel. But among the younger American Jews under the age of 30, only half identify themselves as connected to Israel on an emotional level. This is most evident in university campuses and even more so in the Ivy League schools, where students feel they must not reveal themselves as Zionists because Zionism is equated to racism as the result of increasing progressive propaganda. Only 27% of young Jews strongly oppose the boycott, divestment, sanction movement. The attachment to Israel among the younger Jews is weakening, and they are also increasingly distant from their faith. Some 35% say they would not be concerned if their grandchildren were no longer Jewish. Wow. Stern concludes that Israel and the diaspora Jews themselves must work together in order to create some sort of resolution here. As he puts it, a strategy to design the future of the Jewish people is required. President Isaac Herzog could lead such an initiative together with Almog at the head of the Jewish Agency and with the participation of the Minister of Diaspora. The future of the small Jewish nation must not be neglected, with half living outside Israel. The nation-state bill, which was passed in 2018, states that the ties between Israel and the Jewish world must be preserved, and those words must go beyond ceremonial platitudes. It is Israel's responsibility under its commitment to be the nation-state for all Jews. This is a very important piece, and thank you to Stern for coming up with it and writing it, and hopefully forcing us to think more about it and maybe even acting. Coming up, commentary through cartoons, where pictures tell the story. I want to speak about 7 cartoons and memes today. First up is a sign that is taking a stab at answering that perennial question. Vince the sign guy writes, I grilled a chicken at lunchtime, still no answer on why he crossed the road. Funny. Next is a picture of Charlton Heston reading a Wendy's sign. He's astonished, as we all would and should be when we read it. The sign reads, our secret ingredient is our people, now hiring. That face and that announcement could not be funnier. This next meme is perfect for our society, which focuses on food and is obsessed with dieting. Someone is cutting a challah. The caption reads, how to cut carbs on Shabbat. Shabbat Shalom. That's truly perfect. The next cartoon has a family which is all packed, and we see their suitcases, and they're standing next to an electronic plane, the kind that kids love to sit on outside stores, and the daughter is on the airplane. The son is waiting his turn, and the cost is 25 cents. The husband says, with all the flight delays and cancellations, it's our best hope. It's funny, but unfortunately true. This next meme is very funny, but it's also a critique of our current culture. The meme reads, when a song full of vulgarity is nominated for Song of the Year, and we find Dr. Seuss inappropriate, we have serious issues. And I add, do we ever have serious issues if that's the case? This next cartoon is from Drybones, Yaakov Kirshen, and we haven't looked at Drybones in a long time, but it's worth it. He's always critical and funny at the same time. Here we see a synagogue or a temple with Star of David atop the door. The rabbi is standing in the doorway greeting the congregant. Another congregants are coming and going from synagogue or temple. One of them is wearing a kippah and a talit and carrying a siddur, prayer book. On the lawn is a sign that reads, preferred pronouns, thee and thou. Very, very well done. Thee and thou meaning God, of course. Last up, we see a family leaving their home and lugging suitcases, and money is falling out of the suitcases. The neighbor asks, vacation? The father responds, vacation? No, we're going to the grocery. So they're going to the grocery store, and that is funny. Just because of inflation alone. We can't stop making fun of the inflation. It's just too obvious. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. A new UNESCO report just blew my socks off. Around half the public content related to the Holocaust on Telegram, the messaging service, denies or distorts facts about the killing of 6 million European Jews in the Holocaust. The UNESCO report found that 80% of public German language messages about Nazi genocide during World War II denied or distorted the facts. The same distortion was true for 50% of both English language and French language posts about the Holocaust. The research analyzed 4,000 Holocaust-related posts across 5 top social media platforms. In addition to what they found on Telegram, the researchers found the Holocaust denial or distortion in 90% of the content in Twitter, 17% of the content on TikTok, 8% of the content on Facebook, and 3% on Instagram. The report defined distortion as posts that celebrated the genocide, smeared or blamed its victims, equated it to other events such as Israeli policy towards Palestinians, or omitted facts about Nazi perpetrators and collaborators. Asked about the report, a Telegram spokesman said, quote, Telegram is a platform for free speech where people are welcome to peacefully express their opinions, including those we do not agree with, unquote. The most important point of this report is not the numbers. These social media platforms provide us with a snapshot of today's youth. That's what's important. Only young people are using these platforms. Today's youth have been infected with a point of view that rejects the Holocaust. That is astounding and very alarming. I think we are approaching the point of no return for Iran, especially because of their nuclear technology and their road to a nuclear bomb. France is convinced that there are only a few days left for diplomacy because Iran is on the brink of having a bomb. Kamal Karazi, senior advisor to Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, recently told Al Jazeera's Arabic media that Tehran will also directly respond against Israel should its security be targeted. He said, and I'm quoting here, in a few days we were able to enrich uranium up to 60%, and we can easily produce 90% enriched uranium. Iran has the technical means to produce a nuclear bomb, but there has been no decision by Iran to build one, unquote. This is truly bone-chilling and frightening. We need to monitor this carefully. China is the United States' one true competitor in the world. The United States has forced Israel to put the brakes on high-tech cybersecurity deals with China. Pressure from Washington has been mounting for some time. It started during the Trump administration. As China was pinpointed for the COVID outbreak, serious efforts were made to stymie Israeli-Chinese tech sales and they continue to intensify over time. Israel is considered a hub for cybersecurity firms, many of which are manned by veterans of Israel's military intelligence units. According to Israel's National Cyber Directorate, over 40% of private investments in cybersecurity around the world, that's globally, 40%, are funneled into Israeli firms. Additionally, many foreign high-tech companies have also opened research and development centers in Israel. Until 2018, China solidified its place as an important partner to Israel's burgeoning high-tech sector, which was looking for a reliable source of capital and access to one of the biggest global markets, China. In 2018 alone, Chinese investors poured $424 million into Israeli startups. Chinese behemoths such as Alibaba or Huawei also opened their R&D centers in Israel. One of them closed recently. But the United States wants China to leave Israel, according to the U.S. Embassy spokesman, who spoke to Bloomberg. And this is the quote: "We would like to see Israel's investment screening system strengthened and expanded, especially in the field of high tech. We have been candid with our Israeli friends over risks to our shared national security interests." The spokesperson was, of course, referring to China. The Taliban attacked an ISIS group, killing some and arresting others. ISIS had perpetrated attacks against Uzbekistan and Tajikistan from Afghani soil. So, in response, the Taliban raided ISIS. Last night, special forces of the Islamic Emirate discovered and destroyed a center of Islamic State militiamen. During the operation, 3 of them were killed and 5 others were arrested. That was a quote by Taliban spokesman Zabiullah Mujahid. In a message which was disseminated through Twitter, Mujahid pointed out that ISIS, quote, "their weapons and several vehicles were seized." He wrote, continuing, "It was not so long ago that they launched several rockets attacks against Uzbekistan and Tajikistan." Why all this tension between the Taliban and ISIS? Here's the explanation. ISIS attacked 2 countries from Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. That made the Taliban look bad. This attack was to shut down the ISIS cell that perpetrated those attacks. For the Taliban, the mission was a success, and it was about saving their reputation. Adir Yanko is the YNet reporter who was covering U.S. President Biden's trip to Saudi Arabia. He arrived a few days early to the Gulf state, ahead of the president. This reporter's descriptions of Jeddah were powerful, especially on his second day in the city when he decided to tell people in the shopping mall that he was from Israel. For most of the people he broached the subject with, that little tidbit of information turned into a great big conversation stopper. In other words, Saudi leadership might be inching towards normalization with Israel, but the masses are not there yet. Yanko also pointed out that in the lead up to Biden's arrival to Jeddah, there were no U.S. flags to be seen. There was no fanfare, no pomp, and certainly no circumstance. Compare that to Jerusalem, where there were not only flags upon flags, flying and flying flags, they were ironed before they were displayed in certain places. And they were new. In fact, Yanko pointed out that vendors at the mall did not even know that the U.S. president was due to arrive in their country. That observation was significantly telling. Giving an Israeli journalist the tourist/cold shoulder was to be expected, but not knowing about, not promoting the arrival of the President of the United States is an extremely negative statement on the part of the view of Saudi leadership. It was a major international, intentional, diplomatic diss. As we were saying earlier when we were discussing Itamar Eichner's column in an interview with CNN on the day after U.S. President Joe Biden left Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabian Foreign Minister Abdel Jubair said that Saudi Arabia will normalize relations with Israel only after there's a 2-state solution. And this is important because the Saudi Foreign Minister said, "We have said that Saudi Arabia supports the Arab Peace Initiative. In fact, we offered it. We have made it clear that peace comes at the end of this process, not at the beginning of it. We have also said that the countries that signed the Abrahamic Accords with Israel, those are sovereign decisions made by those countries. We hope that those decisions will have positive impact on the Israeli domestic efforts. Small steps are important, and those have been taken, even if Saudi Arabia has not changed its official stance on normalizing with Israel. On November 27th, in the city of Muscat in Oman, there was a secret meeting between Egypt and Iran. The meeting took place while Egyptian President al-Sisi was in Oman. Iran wanted to make certain that the ongoing Negev summit was not about plotting an attack against Iran. Egypt calmed their fears and explained that the summit's objectives truly were purely economic. During their meeting, Iran and Egypt discussed the situation in Gaza, the Syrian situation, and other matters in the Middle East, especially Iran's actions. The meeting opened the door to relations between the two countries. While Iran's Mehr news agency confirmed the meeting in Oman, it did not specify the issues that were discussed between Cairo and Tehran. Interestingly, there was no, I repeat, no other coverage of this meeting, period, in any Arabic press. The Egyptian Gulf news agencies and newspapers did not report the news about Iran meeting with Egypt. On July 3rd, the Iranian Foreign Minister Hussein Amir Abdollahian did, however, acknowledge that Egypt is an important country in the Islamic world, but then indicated that there were no direct discussions between the two countries. Interesting indeed. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. Did you know that there are different ways of referring to Jews who are not in Israel? Jews who are around the world? The word diaspora, which is often used as one example. Diaspora comes from the Greek dia, which means to scatter or to spread out. Superio means I scatter or to disperse. The diaspora Jews are Jews who are dispersed throughout the world. The Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Bible, uses the term diaspora in just that context. But that's just one example for terms describing Jews around the world. Another is galut, or in Yiddish, galus. Galut or galus, your choice of pronunciation, means exile. The difference between diaspora and galut is huge. It's huge theologically, and it's huge practically. In one case, let's say for instance, Jews are spread out all over the world, and nothing is keeping them from returning to Israel except their location. That's diaspora. And the word for diaspora is tfutzot. Galut or galus, or exile, is very different. When one is exiled, one cannot return unless given permission. This is the essence of the conflict between some ultra-religious Jews and Israel. These ultra-religious Jews believe that the Jews are still in galus, their favorite pronunciation. They believe that permission has not yet been given by God to return to Israel. Galus, galut versus diaspora, tfutzot. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.